It was one of those perfect golden afternoons, and I was pleased to have a scenic road to travel as I glided over the Weir Bridge of the ancient Dublin suburb of Lucan. Lucan's place name is derived from the Irish Loucan, which means both place of the elm trees and also marshmallow plant. The marshmallow plant has traditionally been a common ingredient in Irish folk remedies and, like the elm, it enjoys a marshy habitat. Making my way through the small and bustling town in the marshlands, an instinct from deep within prompted me to turn for the coast road, and so I inhaled deeply and anticipated stolen glimpses of the Irish sea and distant hills. A short stretch of gently flowing motorway would soon carry me over the Wicklow border and into Bray, which is a notoriously beautiful village. It was not, however, my destination today. With a small bag packed optimistically full of summer shorts and t-shirts, I was instead headed for Waterford and the breathtaking village of Dunmore East, the place of the great fort. I would spend a summer writing and imagining and exploring the wilder recesses of the sea-licked coastline. The road opened out now beyond Bray town, and, as I'd hoped, intervals of rolling turquoise and aquamarine interrupted rich tree-lined hedgerows, and I could smell the sea air and the warm coconut scent of prickly yellow windbushes in the sunshine. I sailed on through Greystones and Newcastle, and occasionally tuned back into the soothing drawl of the gardening show presenter on the radio. Tulip, peony, and sweet vernal grass were all discussed in dulcet tones. As the towns that passed me by became smaller and smaller, after a while, even the cosy cafes and laughter-filled playgrounds faded, leaving me only with crop fields and sleepy hay sheds to count the miles that remained of my journey. Wicklow town provided a gentle reminder of civilization as narrow rural roads became slim terraced streets and welcomed me back to the land of ice cream cones and signposts that tell of such places as Summerhill, Dunbar, and Ballinaccarrig. Glimpses of the sea became more frequent as I drove onwards. She seemed to have changed her bright afternoon dress for a velveteen evening gown with more lustrous auburn depth to its twinkling tones of grey and green. Here and there, camper vans huddled in lay-bys and pierside car parks in their 2s and 3s. On the coastal stretch just before Johnstown, the road narrowed so much that I wondered more than once if I hadn't strayed onto some private laneway that would bring me into a farmyard or onto some isolated crag but the sea, dressed all in her best, and guiding me gently southwards, was a constant and reassuring reminder that my aim was true in all senses. That fair salt-soaked lady and I, with the beaches and the hills and occasional towns and villages playing our adoring onlookers across Arklo's Avoca River, through Gorey and back again to the wide and sunny motorway. We raced with the river ban toward the Norman settlement that is now known as Enniscorthy, and onwards to nearby Waterford City, which, being established around the 9th century, some 300 years previous to its neighbour, is the grandfather of settlements in Ireland's sunny southeast, and one of the oldest cities on the island. The road pivoted toward the sun now, and I felt at once like a morning flower turning her face into the radiant, life-giving light. The geometric shadow of the soaring silver suspension bridge ahead blessed me momentarily as I passed under its eaves, and I was treated to visions of the shining river shore and the tufts of trees which hugged her shores on either side of me. Bright orange clouds had appeared near the horizon, flanked by larger, deeper ones that heralded rain in the hours to come. I turned off the greenway now, trying to breathe new life into the muscles in my lower back that had been neglected over the previous months. I felt grounded in my adventuring, in myself. The freedom of journeying was refreshing me, inside and out, although my trusty map indicated that there were only 20 more minutes until this part was over. 20 minutes until I discovered what would be my quaint and yet rather stately abode for the next few months. I had been told it was a fine 19th century building, perched right at the highest point in the harbour at Dunmore East, making up in vantage points for what it lacked in architectural finesse. The headlands in the area were known for the rust-toned sandstone and the unusual topographical features it produced. Sea stacks and arches could be seen if one knew where to look. In truth, the area is composed of sandstone and conglomerate, which give the coastline's reaching fingers a striped sort of texture and an occasionally speckled colour palette. In parts, the overall effect was rough, almost dagger-like. In others it was smooth like the roots of a tree that had grown too close to the ocean and was now becoming a part of it. I hoped I would become part of it too. I was ready to be inspired, ready to be drawn out of myself and into the wonderful folds where the water caresses the land. The road that bypassed Waterford City seemed familiar, in that it was lined with the same carefully planted birch trees and hardy shrubs as other ring roads, and I recognized the names and cheery flag-bedecked facades of the same old retail park businesses and car hire outlets you'd see anywhere else. I was glad to be leaving them behind, and in any case, they were soon replaced by the low stone walls and bulging plumes of foliage which distinguished the Tramore Road. The last of the miles and the countable minutes melted away, and all at once there were white-painted cottages and surfboards being attached firmly to roof racks, and yes, at last, the water. I could drive no further east, lest I end up in the Irish Sea. And so, as I followed the curve of the road toward the heart of the village, a view of the distant Hook Lighthouse was made possible by the dramatically shadowy cloudscape as it diffused the luminous sunset just enough to make out the harmless-looking silhouette. Harmless, I considered, due to the reputation held by the entire area comprised by the tip of the Hook Head Peninsula, on the east of the estuary of three sister rivers, the Barrow, the Nore, and the Shore. There stands Hook Lighthouse, which is considered to be the oldest operational lighthouse in the world, having been built 800 years ago by William Marshall, who was both a successful tournament knight and the first Earl of Pembroke, as is to be expected from a structure of such provenance. Hook had seen its fair share of marine tragedy. It is not, however, the great lighthouse which draws the writers and the ghost hunters from far and wide, but rather its nearby tourist trail counterpart. The first sod was turned on Loftus Hall's original castle in 1170 under the order of Norman knight Raymond le Gros. Le Gros later changed his name to Redmond, and in 1350 his descendants replaced the old castle with Redmond Hall, later Loftus Hall, as it exists today. The home was extensively renovated in the 19th century by subsequent owner, the 4th Marquess of Ely, John Wellington Graham Loftus, in preparation for a visit from Queen Victoria. Inevitably, the royal visit never occurred, and the Loftus family were left bankrupt by the renovations, making them the second noble family to have had the property slip from their grasp. This was no doubt attributed to the house's curse. The stories of the curse's origins, I mused, were best left for a stormy night in the depths of winter time. Loftus Hall and its ghosts were 5 whole kilometres away as the crow flies, on the other side of the mouth of Waterford Harbour. I had been firmly assured that my jovial summer residence shared no such ponderous correlations. Indeed, there seemed no room for ghosts at all now, among the Mediterranean blue window frames of restaurants with Italian names, and the occasional palm trees along the Miami-esque seafront park. A shiver of excitement resonated through me, the kind of excitement brought by the first day of summer holidays from school. Even though I knew I had to spend considerable time during my visit practicing and honing my craft as planned, I simultaneously felt expectations and deadlines fizzle off into the ether as the sun-baked streets of Dunmore East pulled me closer to them in their embrace. Not far beyond a particularly pretty row of thatched cottages on the left, as promised, I found the Fisherman's Hall, which now served as the village library. It was my last given landmark, and, turning down the narrow island road at its gable, the sight of the harbour and the sea beyond took my breath away. I reminded myself of the tales I'd been told about the view from the second-floor windows, and, with a flush of anticipation, I pulled into the neglected yet picturesque gateway that would bring me to my manor atop the sandstone. There she was, peeping out from behind unruly tall trees, with a delightful glass porch guarding her front door, like a shy maiden giggling behind a fan. I stepped out of my car, and upon reaching into the back seat for my little carry case, was assailed by the scent of lemon balm, with the faint promise of honeysuckle and the heavy intermingled salt air of which I was so fond. A privilege, I thought, to be able to smell the unadulterated sea air from time to time. I turned to face the house now, and found myself halfway through the chipped, white-painted gate, which took some persuasion to close again. The yard inside was as meagre and unkempt as its entryway, and the flowering species in the erratic spurts of hedgerow were innumerable as they spilled over each other to soak up more of the sacred sun, which had, by now, climbed well down from its highest pedestal in the afternoon sky. The brooding cloudbank which had crossed my path once or twice en route was now firmly caught up with me, and the prospect of a nighttime rainstorm over the harbour sent another thrill shuddering throughout every crevice of my being. I found the door of the quaint white-painted porch to be unlocked, which served as a welcome reminder that village life did not entail the same concerns over privacy and security which urban residency did. The key to the duck-egg blue front door was under the nearest pot, which contained a rather extensive and deceased houseplant of the saxifrage variety. The warm and faint aroma of generations of families wafted through the doorway as I pushed the handle and stepped into a wide and practical hallway with worn, golden-coloured carpet and hints of a curved balustrade beyond. The first door to my left revealed a modest reception room with glorious views and cushioned sofas. On the right was a smaller room, which I imagined to have been an office or a butler's quarters in the original design of the old place. It seemed to have been serving as a sort of ad hoc luggage store for the numerous regular vacationing friends who had been frequenting it in more recent years. Here and there, over the one battered sofa and a half-full bookcase, were strewn items of clothing and wet gear still patterned with dry sand, giving the room a feeling of immediacy and other people's business. I retreated through the doorway, closing it behind me as I cast an eye over the mahogany-filled dining room and the high-ceilinged kitchen to the rear of the house. But it was the staircase I wanted now. Knowing that the house had been used as group accommodation for summer schooling children at one point had me hoping I wouldn't be sleeping in a bunk bed during my sabbatical in this magnificent relic of a home. On the contrary, there were 3 reasonably sized bedrooms. Each had a sink and a fireplace, and either 1 or 2 double beds fixed with matching upholstered headboards. I chose the one that featured a painted French-style bed with tiny pink roses on its white cotton head. It had dual aspect windows which overlooked both the harbour and the fisherman's hall at the top of the quiet island road. My car looked a little out of place sitting haphazardly in the gateway, and so I decided to venture out and perhaps even rustle up some sustenance. But first, a cup of tea and a sunset. The view from my bedroom now, as the last of the sunlight burst forth in a final show of strength, was beautiful. But I was certain the one from the window of the upstairs salon would be markedly better. So, after filling a cup of decadent jasmine flower from the gas-fired aga in the kitchen, I returned upstairs to better acquaint myself with what appeared to be my new writing room. I was taken aback to discover a baby grand piano, complete with nearby candelabra for effect, hiding behind the stair wall of the salon. Its keys were well worn and yellowed, the velvet seat of its stool long since sunken and faded. It wasn't quite possible to enjoy the luminous view out the sash window from its position, and so I left it there for another day, and opted instead for one of the comfortable-looking clawfoot chairs, which were properly placed in the bay of the window. The soothing scent of jasmine made me glance down into my cup, and I noticed that its dried petals had opened and revealed a hot pink halo from within. Much like the view in front of me, it resembled a rose petal floating in a sky full of honey, and I allowed my focus to move to my breathing now, acutely aware that this was the moment of peace I had travelled so long for. I felt my lower back collapse back into the soft restraint of the seat behind me, and with it fell my shoulders, leaving my chest wide open to expand and rise higher with each healing breath. As I gazed deeper into the tiny orange light that marked the end of the day and the onset of dusk, I exhaled slowly and felt my thighs and knees relax down, rooting me into the ground below me. Even my ankles, it seemed, had been carrying their fair share of annoyance today. After the last of my tea had been sipped and the stars had begun to bloom in the rich navy skyline, I peeled myself away from the window and opened my bag out on the bed. Sitting on top of the pile was the one plush and fleecy cardigan I had packed for the trip. Wrapping it liberally around myself, I made my way downstairs and began about the last of the evening's errands. with car parked tidily inside the front gate, and the makings of a humble meal of soup and bread having been procured from the nearby corner shop, I took a chance on what would hopefully prove to be a scenic and only slightly longer walking route back to the house. I cut down some steps which lay adjacent to the footpath and found myself in the very heart of the harbour. All around were gently swaying boats, moored tightly to huge steel black-painted bollards, and I could see by the signage of the one shuttered little shop front among the various offices that the day's catch was available fresh from the boat each morning. The air was crisp, and from down here the village felt to be humming with gentle silence, like the faintest of stirrings in a well-established undergrowth. Everything about the place felt cosy, even down here in the lonely harbour. I made sure to keep veering slightly to the left when following the path through the harbour, to ensure the best chance of emerging at the bottom of Island Road, and, despite one or two brief moments of doubt, I turned out to be correct in my assertions. 3 minutes of walking the upward semi-spiral behind a short concrete wall which still afforded views of the water, and I found myself back at my merry little gateway. I had also taken note of what may have been a useful back entrance leading into the property, and tried to remind myself to investigate further tomorrow. After a warm, spice-laden meal, I took myself off to bed and wrapped my tired body up in the soft duvet and pillows. The comparative feeling of weightlessness created the sensation of being carried off lovingly towards sleep, and no part of me whatsoever even thought to resist it. In my dreams I found an old recipe book, nestled between sepia-toned cookery volumes on the shelf of the manor's downstairs kitchen. Within its frail leaves was a recipe for lemon curd, which I had tried once on raisin scones and had indeed enjoyed rather immensely. My dream self was full sure of the existence of a lemon tree in the garden, due to the permeating and constant aroma of citrus in each of its hidden corners, and so proceeded to step out into a garden which writhed with life. Vines of plump grapes and white honeysuckle crept around the boundary, whilst a heavenly chorus of bluebirds adorned the sky above. A majestic butterfly in various purple hues guarded the lemon tree, which had luminous suns and moons hanging from its boughs in place of the expected yellow fruit. My dream self was undeterred and picked a healthy basketful to bring back for the curd. Upon returning to the kitchen, a bustling scene from long ago awaited me. Young aproned ladies pegged white linen sheets and nightdresses to clotheslines above the range. Kettles whistled and great copper basins of water were rushed into and out of the room with great urgency. I set about making my curd amongst the organized chaos, dropping my suns and moons carefully into a saucepan and waiting patiently for them to melt into each other as I stirred. Finally, pleased with my efforts, I placed my jars of ambrosia into my basket and headed for the harbour. There I found Manannán MacLir and other spirits of the sea, and from their great watery kingdom they emerged and gratefully accepted my gift. The next thing I knew, I was bathed in a golden glow, and a soft wave of joyful music ebbed towards me on the air. It took a moment to realize that the glow was indeed the morning light, and the music was a kaleidoscopic aria of distant crashing sea foam woven with strains of laughter and the rhythmic ambient hum of village life. I lay still for just a moment to drink it in, and then I wiggled my fingers and toes, just enough to bring myself fully into my body, and at once felt my sleepy spine demanding a good stretch also. And so, unable to wait any longer, I arose to the edge of the bed and placed my bare feet down on the carpet, glad of its warmth as I accustomed myself to life outside the duvet. On pulling back the curtains, I smiled from the inside out at the sight of a myriad of windsurfers and kayakers flitting around on the water. Being a distant spectator of all things water sport related, I was always pleased at the delight taken in zipping up wetsuits and trying to skim one's way across the surface of the water by various means. All the same, I decided I would stick to the warm, dry land for today. I quickly dressed and treated myself to a breakfast of croissant and ripe pears, and of course, more tea to fuel the day's explorations. I began by making the back door a usable entrance again by tidying away the boxes and old boots which had been impeding the way. Outside the door was a rather unexciting and narrow concrete yard, dedicated to practical operations, such as rinsing down wetsuits and hanging them up to dry. To my left began a pathway which meandered through a reasonably sized garden, separated by fragrant bushes into 3 smaller green areas. Among them I found fuchsia, multiple types of mint, and the mellow and citrusy lemon balm which had been so potent on the breeze of the previous evening. In the final third of the garden, I found a small gate squeezed into the bulging hedgerow and found there was just enough leeway to swing it open and make my way onto the very bottom of Island Road. The shortcut, in truth, had only cut meters off my route to the harbour, but when you could go through a garden so pleasing to the senses, who would choose otherwise? I had decided to start in the harbour for my explorative walk today, since it really was the focal point from whence the rest of the village had merely spindled its way into existence like an afterthought. There were fishermen and various seekers of the fruits of the Irish Sea, hanging around and seeing to their business in the sunshine, and so I decided to investigate the cove around the bend. It was hidden from sight of both the manor and the road, and as I passed the pier and its frolicking neoprene-clad revellers, I was surprised to find a small and colourful network of sheds and shipping containers, which evidently made up the local adventure centre and sailing club. I watched for a while from a conveniently placed wall, as boats and boards were slid down the slipway and on to the deep sea-green tide which glimmered softly in the morning sunlight. There was a small stretch of sand in the gullet of the cove, which was the colour of demerara sugar. A long bank of green with intermittent outbursts of yellow firs enclosed the cove on its far bank, and I found myself wondering before long what may have lain on the other side of it. And thus I spent my afternoon, making my way from one furze-lined horizon to another, discovering forests and beaches and the red sentinel-like sea stacks which stood firmly, submerged as if for eternity, in the relentless tide around this expansive corner of coastline. In the evening I retreated to a hot bath, and upon finding a cosy, well-placed bistro table, nestled into the bosom of a previously overlooked jasmine bush, settled down in the garden to allow the cool and refreshing night air to roll in off the Irish Sea and bless me with another good night's sleep. It seemed like a different garden entirely by the light of the thick crescent moon. Silver-tinted foliage gave way along the manor's eastern perimeter to silver-tipped waves beyond, although from here you'd have mistaken it for a lake, so peaceful it was. Surely Manannán couldn't sleep on a night so lovely. I carefully wrote down all my notes from the day's meanderings and decided that I would spend the next day writing too, after a leisurely morning scout for breakfast pastries, of course. My body had quickly befriended this new lifestyle, it seemed. The coming months held plenty of time for adventuring, for dreaming, for tinkling on old piano keys, and perhaps even making lemon curd. I felt nourished and truly spent as I sensed sleep making its steady way towards me once more. And so, time to retreat into my little pocket of luxury, into the feather bed and the sound of faraway waves. The fire has burned down to mere embers. The old house has settled in for the night. To sleep, to sleep.